is Nuno Nunes, as Catarina was saying. I'm the coordinator, I'm a professor at the Institute Superior Tecnico and the coordinator of the Bauhaus of the Sea Sails, which is one of the 7 lighthouse projects of the new European Bauhaus. Let me see if this is working. This is me. I'm going to be around today and tomorrow. And I'm also coordinating another big project on blockchain for social good, and that's why I'm trying to combine both things here. The Bauhaus of the Sea Sails, like I was saying, is one of the 7 European lighthouse projects of the new European Bauhaus. And the new European Bauhaus is the movement created by President von der Leyen to try and connect the European Green Deal, which is the EU policy, with a new way of engaging people, inspiring people for a better future. And so this is her actually in one
Today,
of the pilot cities of Venice talking about the project.
To this community. The university, together with Ca' Foscari, the mayor, and the port authorities, have joined a project called Bauhaus of the Seas Sails. It is one of the first 6 demonstrator projects of the new European Bauhaus.
So she was talking about the project in Venice, which is one of the 7 pilot cities of the project that we are coordinating. By the way, it's the only project coordinated by a Southern European country. All of the other projects are coordinated by the north of Europe. And it tries to bring together these 3 dimensions: sustainability, inclusion, and aesthetics. And we are bringing digital, because I'm a computer scientist by training, into this equation. And hopefully I'm going to try and show you some results of the project, because we are entering the 3rd year where we are actually trying to implement some of these solutions, hopefully some of them using blockchain technology. So I'm also looking for partnerships and collaborations that could enable us to have a bigger impact with this project. We are based in Lisbon, although we do have a pole here, our institute, actually in this building, literally, mostly focused on another area, which is e-games, in this area called now Beato Innovation District. And the reason why we left campus, apart from not having space, is actually that we wanted to bring together different disciplines to do our research, especially people coming from design, social sciences, but also we wanted to be closer to the community and closer to the river. Lisbon is, as you know, a coastal city like many of the others. And so the idea of proposing the Bauhaus, the new European Bauhaus, to come to the ocean seemed quite obvious for a country like Portugal. For myself, who am actually from Madeira Islands, I grew up here. And so for me, it didn't make sense to have a new movement that would not look at the oceans as the next thing that we need to take care of if we really want to have any chances in fighting climate change. Like I told you, 7 cities are involved. Actually, it's Lisbon and Oeiras, not just Lisbon, Venice and Genova, the Delta in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, Hamburg, and the Horizon Strait with Malmö and Copenhagen. And these 7 cities represent very different ecosystems, aquatic ecosystems, but they are all facing similar challenges. And these challenges, as you probably know, have to do with rising sea levels, food chains related to the oceans or the rivers or lagoons, but also to the preservation of cultural heritage, migration, and integrating new cultures. And so the idea was that this project was going to look, coming from the arts, going to look at some of these problems, and in the 3rd year, it was going to try to implement some of these technology, some solutions using technology, in particular blockchain, for some of the problems that I'm going to show. So the idea was that we wanted to have the project doing the co-design process in the 1st year in all of these 7 cities. In the 2nd year, bringing in artists and cultural institutions to work with people and the local communities to inspire them in new ways of changing the way they relate to climate, the way they relate to the ecosystems, the way they relate to their cities, in order to then, in the 3rd year, try to inspire new technologies that could scale these solutions. For us, digital is the scaling solution of the century. It doesn't matter if it's blockchain or something else, but the idea is that many of the lessons learned with these pilot projects will only be scalable if we find digital solutions, and that's where blockchain comes into the picture. So the idea is that we need to look at aesthetics, how can we use cultural activities to inspire people for a new way of living. In the morning we were talking about how people can connect with blockchain technologies if they don't understand. And here we are doing more or less the same thing. How can people connect with climate change in a way that relates to their daily lives? Also, we can help people to be sustainable. Everybody, I think, wants to be sustainable. The question is, how can you help people be sustainable? And also, can we do this in an inclusive way? And that's one of the problems that any attempts to fight climate change are facing, which is the pressures between the young people and the older people. The older people want to keep living the way they've lived. The younger people feel that their future is at loss. So we need to have an inclusive way to move forward together. And that's what we've been doing in the Bauhaus of the Seas project. And already in the first year, when we were supporting these co-design strategies, many interesting ideas came up. Some of them could actually be implemented with blockchain technologies. So the first one was that we created pilot teams to co-design or reimagine the cities based on a pilot team, which then is enlarged with more people from the communities, people that understand from the biodiversity sector, energy, industry. And we enlarged those co-design teams, and we even included more than humans, so animals, and we will talk a little bit about that. So that's one of the areas where blockchain could actually be quite useful. Because what happens today in these kind of co-design efforts is that everything that is happening from the smaller groups there all the way to the bigger ecosystem, when it's transposed to design guidelines or policy, it's completely lost. So we have a traceability problem, and we also have a problem of trust. People don't trust the authorities in making sure that their opinions could be of use. And I'm going to show you some examples of how we've tried to do this, starting from one example here in Madeira, where we actually used, starting from an example here in Madeira, where we were trying to understand the mobility of people in a small island like Madeira. This is a project like 7 years old, done with a student from Tecnico. I had moved to Tecnico that year. And the idea is that can we use sensors to detect the movement of people, and especially the impacts of CO2 emissions when, for instance, a cruise ship lands here in the city of Funchal. And this creates lots of issues about traceability, not only of the IoT fluxes that we were extracting back then and trying to visualize in that beautiful animation I showed you, but also asking the opinions of people. This is a work that we've done on top of those data sets, which came out of IoT devices with a group from University of College London, where we actually used this device, which was collecting the opinions of people on top of the hardcore data that we were collecting. So this idea that we need traceability in order to understand what people want, and we can scale this. The last example of doing this type of strategies, of co-design strategies or participatory techniques, was actually done by us, by our group at ITI, for the Comissão Técnica Independente, so the committee that was deciding the location of the new airport of Lisbon. The head of the committee is a colleague of Miguel and myself in Tecnico. She came to me and she asked, can you help us build a digital tool that is going to collect the opinions of people about this big problem we have in Portugal, which is where are we going to put the next airport? And I said, yes, but you don't put my name and you'll give me complete freedom to do it the way I think it should be done. And we did this quite successful platform, which collected thousands of opinions from people. And it was designed in a way that you could actually compare the opinions of people that were against and for a certain location. You could see what are the pros and the cons. So it was designed in a way to avoid polarization and to make people try to reach a consensus. The second best location of the airport of Lisbon came from this platform. Nobody had talked about Vendas Novas until a group of people actually used the platform to suggest that location. Where can blockchain help? This system is completely centralized. And I'm sure that many people would prefer that a system like this could be decentralized. And we are working on a version with blockchain for this type of system, and I think there is a huge opportunity here. I know that there are many companies and many entrepreneurs here to work on something like this that could be deployed in many other areas of our collective life. But building on this, what we are doing is we are also trying to explore new organizational models in the project, especially organizational models that can include the voice of non-humans. So let's say, what if you could ask the dolphin of the Tagus River where the airport should be located? Actually, we did this. We didn't talk to the dolphins yet, but we actually talked to biologists that were speaking on behalf of the dolphins of the Tagus River. And this new ZWOOP, which is the new organizational model that we are adopting in the Bauhaus of the Seas, is actually being deployed as we speak in Amsterdam. as a new decentralized model to help the neighborhoods of the city of Amsterdam to better include the concerns of non-humans. Let's say how the garden in my neighborhood could have a voice in many of the decisions that we are making. Again, a huge opportunity. We are actually already have a master thesis implementing this new model as a DAO, and we have a PhD student who is a designer and is trying to interpret this new aesthetics. She just built this together with a colleague, Mariana Pestana, who is a colleague, a faculty member at our department. They designed this beautiful installation which represents an ecosystem and where you can see a dialogue using AI to speak on behalf of the non-humans inside that ecosystem. Again, trying to find ways to make people understand the challenges and the opportunities of decentralized platforms. So again, it might be a kind of a weird idea, but this is the way we are trying to inspire people and make them understand how these new decentralized platforms could be useful for their future. Here's an example of a discussion between many different, one of them is even a bacteria talking with a dolphin about what could happen in the Tagus River. And I can tell you that when people get into this art installation and start understanding what is the possible dialogue that can happen in an ecosystem, they start thinking about these opportunities in a different way. So again, our lab works a lot with artists, with designers, and we are more than welcome to show you what we can do when we try to engage people like that. Another example is the work of my colleague Valentina Nisi on inclusive digital storytelling, which actually came from another EU project called MEMEX. And this project was in Paris, Barcelona and Lisbon. It was looking at how marginalized migrant communities could tell their stories about the places where they've migrated, in particular for these 3 cities. It was based on an app, but this raised a lot of interesting issues about how do these people trust the platforms to input their content, especially when they are very fragile and marginalized community members. And guess what? They don't really trust the traditional platforms. These communities don't use Instagram. They don't use these platforms. They would like to have platforms where they could trust. This is one of the stories actually inputted by a community member in Lisbon about the women of Lisbon, where he was shooting, or she was shooting many of the landmarks of the city of Lisbon and connecting it with her roots in Africa. And it actually generated a very interesting discussion, because back then there was a huge controversy about this statue of an old slave woman in Lisbon. And we found out in this research that actually the people descended from the African countries find that statue not to be a symbol of oppression and colonialism, but rather to be a symbol of freedom. And so many times this, what we call the official heritage, is not connected with what actually people feel. And again, another possibility, this system was implemented with blockchain technologies by one of our students, and we are also looking for partnerships to make it work. And I will finish with another example, the regenerative menu. When we talked about what could be done in these cities, the thing about food came out immediately as one of the most important ones. So trying to make sure that we could redesign the menus, taking advantage of the local bio ecosystem around us, and trying to use more local products to include that. And this was inspired by the amazing work of Cooking Sections, which is an artist studio called Climavore. As you can imagine, the name Climavore tries to make a connection between climate and the way we eat, whether it's herbivore or carnivore. And the idea that they had is that they created these installations. Here is with oysters. These oysters, when the tide goes down, they become a place where people can talk. When the tide goes up, they are breeding places for oysters that filter the water and have a positive regeneration in the ecosystem. And here you have an example of the community coming back. And we are Portuguese, we know how much time we spend talking to each other over a lunch or a dinner table. And here they were coming up and talking and discussing how they could change their food habits and have a positive impact in the environment. We are trying to do this. It's not easy because food is very cultural. And it's part of that new aesthetics. And the way we are trying to do this here is in Hamburg, in the Deutschtalhalle, which is the modern art museum of Hamburg, where they actually installed a kitchen inside the museum, and they brought the local fishermen and farmers to make an installation, to cook food in the museum, to expose people to this new way of thinking. One of the things they were doing, and they are doing in Hamburg, is that they have a fish that entered the ecosystem of the river, is killing everything because it's an invasive species, and they are trying to catch the fish and try to find a way that people will start eating that fish so that they could rebalance the equilibrium of that ecosystem. And actually they are doing sausages with the meat of the fish. And so we had sausages, they are very good. And in eating those sausages, you're not only eating something local, but you're actually fighting an invasive species that is killing the ecosystem of the Elbe River. By the way, the same thing is happening in Venice. Venice has been completely invaded by a new blue crab, and we are doing the same process in Venice. Can we find a recipe that is going to make people eat the blue crab that is killing the lagoon in Venice? So a lot of the work and research that I've been doing is about how to integrate and make digital technologies more sustainable. One of the things we found out is there is a big mismatch between the research that is done in my field, which is human-computer interaction. In the panel today, you were discussing usability, which is an old-fashioned term for people like me that have been working for 30 years in this area. And one thing we found out is that economy is the missing link between people like me that are working in sustainability and people like you that are working on a technology with a very focus on financial assets, on financial instruments, on economic impact. And we need to bring these two things together. And so my talk is not about blockchain. My talk is more about how can we find bridges that can connect people like me who are interested in sustainability, and I would say probably all of us as citizens at least are interested in sustainability, with a groundbreaking technology like blockchain. And how can we make those bridges effective so that we can have a better life? I will finish just with some examples of future tidal architectures, which is another area what we have been working on. This is an amazing project that is going to happen next year in Oeiras. So they are redesigning the whole distributed museum of the Tagus River based on these principles of the Bauhaus of the Seas. And I invite you next year, at the end of next year, not only to see some blockchain technologies, hopefully perhaps working with some of you in collaboration, because our focus is not the technology itself. We have been discussing in Tecnico together with Miguel's group how we can bridge this, because it's not easy, but also to invite you to see a distributed museum happening actually in the Tagus River. Oops, I'm going to skip this one, sorry. Don't have time, already have a flashing negative timer. The idea is that we are going to ripple this movement. The project will finish funding in the next year, but we call the project Bauhaus of the Seas Sails because we wanted it to be the first project of a sequence of projects, and we wanted the community to appropriate a narrative that I think has been very well received, not only in Brussels, but by the communities. We just talked with Manaus for the COP next year to have Manaus as the first non-European city to be part of the Bauhaus of the Seas, and we hope to see this happening all over the world, hopefully in a few times. If you're an academic and you like to read some papers, these are some of the papers we published, but if you want it, you can also send me a text or an email, and I was happy to share the papers. We also do research, and our token is papers as academics, so we try to do that. And if you are interested in some of these topics, I just scratched the surface of what we are trying to do. There is a video series that you can find on YouTube, on the Bauhaus of the Seas website, but also on the channel of architecture on TV, which is talking in deep about some of these ideas. And before I close, I just wanted to say this is not just my work. This is the work of many brilliant people with whom I work, not only in Tecnico and ITI, but also artists, surfers. You see José Albergaria from the Azores, probably the best graphic designer in Portugal, who designed the logo of the Bauhaus of the Seas, Miguel Figueira, many other people that collaborate with me and whose work I've just shown you. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuno. Thank you. We do have some time for questions, if you have, so we can have some light in the audience. Great. Guys, take the opportunities. This is what is about Madeira Blockchain Conference. Questions, answers, or any comments. Doesn't have to be precisely a question. Very good. I know this is always like this, so we do have one over there, please.
My name is Daniel. I'm from Germany. I just wanted to ask you, as an expert, in Germany I have my own solar business. And are there any inventions, or do you have any ideas how to use the blockchain in the solar business?
So actually, my first connection with blockchain, apart from a story we were talking over lunch, which I mined 1 Bitcoin to help a friend, and then I lost half of the Bitcoin at least. The first time I actually worked with blockchain was on the energy sector, trying to support energy communities in cities. And it's, I think, one of the best ways you could use blockchain would be to have a kind of a market that was supported on DLTs. So you could sell your solar energy to your neighbor and vice versa, because many times you're not at home and you're producing the energy. What is the challenge there is that, again, it's a very regulated market. And actually in Portugal, when you put up a solar panel in your house, you're basically giving your energy back to the company, into the grid for free. If you don't want to do that, you either need to invest a lot or you don't have the technology to do it. So we actually developed that technology. We implemented it on a pilot of a project many years ago. What we found out, actually, in that project, was a very interesting project, was that people, they had an app, they could see how much energy they had produced and consumed during the day. They could decide how to sell the energy to their neighbors. And the best finding we got from that project is that people loved it, not because they were selling for whatever token we were using back then, I think it was IOTA, but because they found it was a great way to meet the neighbors. And here you go, we were talking in the morning about this. Many times the key to success of some of these technologies, it just makes people connect to each other. It's not about the token. It was about the fact that when they met at the elevator, they had something to talk about. I said, I sold you energy yesterday. And this started a conversation in the building. And so if I wanted to pass on some of the lessons I've learned with that project, is that perhaps you should invest more on the community aspect and less on the technology aspect if you want to be successful.